So this week started on Monday morning with me singing Thanksgiving songs in the shower. I always start on a Monday morning reflecting on what I need to come and share with you the following Sunday. Because believe it or not, these Sundays follow with rapid regularity. And I'm always scared that I'm not going to have something to fill a 20-minute sermon. Ha ha. And so I started on a Monday morning after having recovered from the previous day, and I knew that harvest would be the theme for today. And so I have been singing at the top of my voice some of the great harvest and thanksgiving hymns. The one that first popped into my mind on Monday morning quite early was an anthem from Caleb Simper's cantata, The Rolling Seasons. It is an anthem that I grew up with, the very choir in which my mama has been singing for 53 years, pulls it out every February for the Methodist Harvest Festival in Somerset West. Thou crownest the year. Does it sound familiar to anyone? Thou crownest the year with thy goodness, and thy paths drop fatness. The fields are filled with corn, and the little hills rejoice. Those words, of course, come from Psalm 36, which must have at some point in the history of Israel been a psalm of thanksgiving and celebration in memory of God's faithfulness that particular season. The people of God have always known through the centuries that God is trustworthy and dependable. Colin's going to play that music as an exit piece, simply because you don't know it. I thought of that beforehand and provided him with the music. So there will be quite a majestic postlude after the service. You might want to stick around for a minute or two. Thou crownest the year with thy goodness. Then, of course, the natural progression out of that anthem that no one here knows went into some better known things. I went automatically to Thanks Be to God. That you must know, eh? It's a very old one, probably a bit older than that first hymn we sang. Thanks be to God for roses red. From there I just had to. I couldn't resist. From there I just had to go to Handel's famous Thanks Be to Thee. One of those unforgettable pieces written in 3/4 time. Thanks be to thee, thanks be to thee, thanks be to thee, O Father. Lord, let thy goodness and mercy dwell over us through eternity, and let thy praise and truth live forever. I can see that you are totally, utterly lost. Perhaps next week we can have the organist play that piece just to trigger your memory. I would be very surprised if no one here knows it, because it's just such an exquisite piece of music. Guess what the closing hymn for today is going to be? If anybody here says Andre Swartz's Donkey, then I'm going to run into the hills, okay? But you're at least on the right track. It's going to be a great Thanksgiving hymn to a rousing German tune. Now thank we all our God with hearts and hands and voices. For today our focus is Thanksgiving. Our theme is that of celebration and joy. For we are remembering God's unwavering faithfulness. We are calling to mind His covenant love. And we are kneeling before His dazzling throne in adoration, knowing that He has been good to us, better than expected. Today we thank God for the reliability of of the seasons. For we know that at the end of summer, there is harvest. And of course, if there's no harvest, we wouldn't eat. We celebrate how God sustains the universe that He has created. How God keeps the planets in line is nobody's business. Who can explain His handiwork? There are even passages in the Old Testament that speak of how God knows every star and calls each of them by name. Are you with me in being staggered by such awe and wonder, power and glory? Our response to God's provision has to be simple but meant. For we as humans have so little available to us. Even the vocabulary that we have access to is limited. For words can only do so much. And of course it sounds pretty shameful for us to approach God this morning with an eager thank you. But that's all we've got. We need to try, however, that as we thank Him, to lift this roof with our meager voices, so that He knows that our response is heartfelt, one of profound praise and most sincere thanksgiving. How God gets it right to make sure that seeds we sow germinate. Our God gets it right to be present when even a weak little bird falls from its nest, is something that we can never grasp. For He is almighty and all-present, all-knowing, and in spite of His power and holiness, He still makes time for us, reaching out to sinners whom He has made His absolute priority. If you ask me, it is something that boggles the mind. We have to read a psalm of thanksgiving, and there are many, but I opted for the most obvious one, Psalm 100. I'm reading from the NIV version. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. That's what we've been trying to do in the last half an hour, isn't it? To shout for joy. To worship the Lord with gladness, and to come before Him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God, the writer says. Know that the Lord is God. It is He who made us, and we are His. We are His people, the sheep of His pasture. Enter His gates. This is stuff that we get up to every Sunday morning. We enter His gates with thanksgiving, or we should at least come into His courts with praise. And this morning we are sure to give Him thanks and to praise His name. Why? For the Lord is good, and His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. After I had already given this psalm to my secretary to put onto the screen for this morning, I couldn't actually change it, but there's another psalm that had come to mind since then, and that is Psalm 136, which is an antiphonal psalm. What does that mean? It means that when it was used in the temple in Jerusalem, the priest would sing a line, or the cantor, the choir leader, would sing a line, and the people would respond. That's what is called antiphonal praising or antiphonal praying. So I want us to just quickly look at another psalm of thanksgiving, and that's Psalm 136. And I want us just to try just a few lines to get a sense of how it would have felt like in the temple in the old days. So I'm going to read a line, and your answer to that will be, His love endures forever. This is my feeble attempt as preacher to keep you awake until 9. So I read a line, your response is? Great, you've got it. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. Give thanks to the God of gods. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. To Him who alone does great wonders. I've just read your mind. You're like, please don't read all 26 verses. I think you've got the mood of the song. And so it involved people to participate in that great hymn of praise in the ancient temple in the old days. And the priest would celebrate God's goodness shown throughout creation. He would boast about God's splendor and glory all around the earth. And the people would have this mantra that they would sing, praising God's name and celebrating His love, which endures forever. And so today we give thanks for who He is and what He does. I have had for a very long time as a minister been having a theological problem with the harvest festival. For it's a little bit unreal because we're not farmers, right? I know that there are some farmers in the congregation and they have been very generous with some of their crops, especially the grapes. But the general person sitting in the pews is not a farmer. We don't sow and reap, we don't till the fields, and we don't make sure that our laborers get paid on time. And so when it comes to a harvest festival in church, I lean more towards thanksgiving than towards an actual harvest, if you know what I mean. So that all of us can be included, whether we work the fields or not. As from Monday morning, when I burst into song in the shower, singing, Thou crownest the year with Thy goodness, a sermon has been developing in my heart. A sermon based on Bevan, what are you thankful for this harvest season? What are you most appreciative of when it comes to God's love, provision, and dependable care? I have often done the next exercise in youth groups because teenagers are often very shy to pray out loud, and I know that some adults are also. But it's called popcorn prayer. It's where one says only one word for what one is thankful. And so it makes it easy. There's no drama. There's no hecticness. You are just expressing one word towards God for His goodness towards you. Could we try that, or is it something that will fall flat here at the 8 o'clock? I think we must give it a shot. So I'm going to say something, and then you can, just where you are seated, just say one word, something for which you are grateful. Okay? Jesus.
Family.
I knew family would be a big one.
Love.
When we spend some time thinking, there are lots of words that will pop up. For we are grateful for many things. We are grateful towards God for how He looks after us, just as He promised He would. I want to talk a little bit about the things that I am most grateful for. I can assure you that I also have a long list. And I've said on that list many of the things that you have now mentioned. Things like health and family, salvation, I also thank Him for this church that I've been given, because you mean more to me than words are able to express. I'm thankful for the privilege of being a minister, even in my inadequate and insufficient state. He allows me to shepherd a part of His flock, and that is a privilege and an honor that I would not exchange for all the tea in China. What am I most grateful for in my life? As I share this, I'm pretty sure that you will nod in agreement between now and now. The first thing that I want to thank God, after thanking Him for a bountiful harvest, the first thing that I want to thank God for unmistakably is for His presence in my life. Can you imagine what life would have been like without Him by your side? 24/7. There would have been nothing left of us by now. For this world bruises us, it beats us up, it batters us, it skins us alive. And without Him, we would have just shriveled up. But because He is with us, because He watches over our ways, because He is who He says He is, and because He always lives up to the promises He gave us, we can know beyond a shadow of any doubt that He is with us in every step that we take. Remember the extreme measure that David went to explain God's presence in his life in Psalm 23. David says, even when I am having my worst day, in other words, even when I'm crawling through a valley of the shadow of death, even when there's nothing worse that life can possibly do to me, even there you will be with me, and your shepherd's rod and your shepherd's staff will show me the way. I'm not saying that I always feel His presence. I'm not saying that my faith doesn't sometimes wobble. I don't say that I all the time have this amazing sense that He's right by my side, because I don't. But I do know that His promises never fail. And I do know that He can never, ever go back on His word. So when He says He will be with me, that's what I'm going to believe and base my life on. And sometimes my heart and my mind go out of their way to say to me, Bevan, with what you are experiencing, He cannot possibly be with you still. And then my reply to my mind and my heart is, nothing could be further from the truth. We know that God takes the reassuring that He is with us very seriously. For there are countless times in the scriptures where God constantly tells people that He is with them. The earliest account we have is in Exodus chapter 3, where Moses is called, hearing God's voice through a burning bush. And Moses, just like Aaron and Joshua would later do, tries to cook up some excuse, saying, Lord, firstly, I'm heck of afraid, so this whole thing of going to the Pharaoh ain't going to work for me. Also, I'm not the best speaker. Surely there are other people who are more eloquent than me. Make a plan. Let me be your plan D or your plan E. Don't start with me. God says to Moses, here's the reason for why you can appear boldly and bravely before the Pharaoh of Egypt. I'm going to be with you. And I am 100% convinced that that guarantee hasn't lost its power or its meaning. That as valid as it was for Moses, so valid it is for us. For we, the ones trying to survive in this scandalous world, and stuff happens to us, stuff so painful that we sometimes succumb to that feeling that we've been abandoned and deserted by God Himself. When that feeling takes control of my spirit, I clear my throat and say, I beg to differ. For my trust in God has never been misplaced. And I have always found God to be exactly who He said He was in the first place. And so if He gave me that unshakable promise, I'm going to hold on to it for dear life. We have another account in Joshua chapter 1, where Joshua tries to school him out of the mission that God had laid out for him. He really just wasn't in the mood. Perhaps it was too daunting a task, or maybe he really felt that he wasn't up to it, or maybe he thought that he didn't have what it took. Whatever the reason, Joshua felt that he just couldn't go ahead with it. What did God say to him in order to encourage him and make him strong? Did God say something to the effect of, Joshua, if you do this for me, I'll write you a big fat check? What did God say? Joshua, wherever you go, and in whatever you do, you don't need to be nervous, for I'm going to be with you no matter what. And as you take my people to the promised land, I will be there like a bear in every challenge you face and in every test you have to go through. That's not where it stops, this promise of God's presence. God turns up the volume a tad when it comes to the prophet Isaiah. So now we're talking what? 500, 600, maybe in parts 700 years after guys like Moses and Joshua. During the time of Isaiah, God's people went through a terrible period. They were dragged into Babylonian exile. It's the lowest of low points in the story of the Old Testament. They were down, discouraged, and desperate. But God, in His infinite mercy, made a plan for His people, and God sent them a messenger in the form of Isaiah. And in Isaiah 41, in the heart of Babylonian exile, God sends these words to His people, spoken by the prophet. And God says to His people, and the prophet speaks in the first person, and God says, do not be afraid, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. There had not before that been a more crucial point in Israel's history than then, when they were wondering about God's presence. Where they weren't so lactose certain about whether God was actually with them in Babylon or not. And so they needed that promise to be renewed and polished up a bit. And so Isaiah took it upon himself to give the people what they so longed to hear. That they needn't be afraid, even in the land of the enemy. For even there, God was. As if that wasn't enough, God uses more poetic language to make the same point 2 chapters on, in Isaiah 43. where God probably saw that his people hadn't gone for the bait, that they hadn't put their faith in the words of Isaiah when he said, I am with you. And so God needed another way in. God needed to change his slant a tad so that the people could actually go for what he was saying. And so God, in a stint of real drama, says, you know what? You know what? This time around, this is how I'm going to put it. I have called you by name, and you are mine. And nothing and no one will ever change that. I am with you in spite of what you are facing. When you have to go through rough waters, waters that almost drown you, I will be there. And then in one last attempt, God saw that they still didn't get the picture, and God added this for good measure. Even when you have to walk through fire, I will hold your hand. Is there any reason for us to believe that those words don't still ring true for us 2,700 years later? For although the world changes, and although our situations change all the time, he never does. And so what he said then is still legitimate now. He is with us no matter what. And I want to thank him for his presence in our lives. For he knows that our lives are not perfect. And he knows that suffering appears on our way. And so does struggle and frustrations and fears. But in it all, we must always try our best to still ourselves and to hear that gentle whisper, the second thing I really want to thank God for, the first being his presence in my life, I really want to thank God for his reckless love. For a love as out of control as his must surely be described as reckless. It runs wild all over the place. It is unstoppable and it is unbreakable. So I want to thank him today afresh for how he insists on loving the likes of us. I talked a bit about Moses earlier, didn't I? Just want to check if you're still with me. Let me talk about Moses again quickly. I'm trying to find the earlier passages, firstly about the reassurance about God's presence, but also the promise of his love. And lo and behold, I found in Exodus 34, verse 6, where God had sent Moses up onto the mountain again. Moses had broken the first tablets on which the Ten Commandments had been written. God gave him, it's just like God to do this, God gave him a second chance, and God said to him, go up onto the mountain again, get 2 flat stones, I'm going to write the Ten Commandments once again on those tablets. This time round, don't break them. And so in Exodus 34, Moses meets with God on the top of the mountain, and God comes past Moses in verse 6, and God says the following: the Lord, namely himself, the Lord is good and gracious, abounding in love and slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness to 1,000 generations. Even there, we have the first clue of what was to come, of how God was going to reveal His love, of how God was going to let His grace and mercy unfold in the coming millennia. And of course, God exposing His heart reached a climax on Calvary. For never before had we come face to face, eyeball to eyeball, with love as reckless as that. Love to broken sinners who have absolutely nothing to offer in return. And so even as I speak of God's crazy love for us, I find myself tingling all over. For this love, dear friends, is ours. We've got it right to come to understand and fathom so many things. We've walked on the moon even, and scientists are getting cleverer and cleverer. We've climbed the highest peaks. We have probed the depths of the oceans. And one day we might even live on Mars. But there's this one thing that I think we will never be able to fully comprehend. And that is the love of God. Jesus makes a statement in John chapter 15. And Jesus says, "Greater love than this has no man, that he should lay down his life for his friends." It's almost as if Jesus was putting a stamp on God's love embodied in Him. It's almost as if Jesus was sealing the deal, saying, if you want to see what saving love looks like, go to the cross of Calvary, where God pours out His everything out of love for a deviant world. And that is why Easter means so much to me. And that is why my first teaching that will happen on the 5th of March on Ash Wednesday will deal with the meaning of Easter and why it's such an important festival in the church and why it is so sad that the world has ended up raping this holy time in the life of the church. I have never been able to reconcile myself with shops trading on the sacred day of Good Friday. Simply because I think only people who don't understand the insane extent of God's love can do that. And so Easter will always be, at my insistence, a special time in the life of this church. And we will come and reflect on Good Friday, on Calvary love. Theologians talk about the epicopasis of God, the self-emptying of God for the sake of the world. Only a God who loves beyond compare can do that. I often have a hunch that there are people who sit in my services who are not convinced that God loves them. Because sometimes we mess up quite dismally. And sometimes we fall far, and sometimes people tell themselves that they've fallen too far, that they've reached a ceiling, that God's love can't still be intact for them. If there's anybody in this building here today, I want to tell you straightforwardly, there's no easy way to say this, you're wrong. For it is impossible. Now I think of that song by Perry Como, it's impossible. Da, 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 da. It's impossible for God not to love you. The best thing about God's love is that it doesn't depend on our love for Him. For sometimes our love for Him is a little bit of a yo-yo, isn't it? Takes a bit of a roller coaster ride. Let me tell you today, once and for all, that God's love for you doesn't depend on your love for Him. You cannot stop God's love for you. It's impossible. When I drive to Somerset West, which is still too often, my mom doesn't understand the price of petrol, so she demands that I come and visit them at least 2-3 times a month. And the last while I've been using the coastal road because of the roadworks at Bottrop and the protests in Grabo, and besides it's quite a beautiful drive, Clarence Drive. But it is long, it's 20 kilometers longer actually, and sometimes I get a little bit lonely in the car and wait for it. I sometimes, which I never do because I pray in the car, I sometimes switch on the radio. I never do that, but of late I've been doing it. And the other day, as I was making my way back from Somerset West in the dark, 5:30 in the morning, I needed to be here for a meeting, I listened to a song by Bruno Mars, of all people. I didn't know the song. The song is all about a grenade. It's quite catchy. I listened to the end of it. The chorus is very fetching. The chorus is where he says to this person he had broken up with, his ex-girlfriend or whatever, saying, I would even have been willing to catch a grenade for you. I would even have been willing to jump onto the blade of a knife for you. I would even have jumped in front of a train for you. Dramatic much. I would even have taken, listen to this, I would even have taken a bullet to my brain for you. And as much as I didn't enjoy the song, it did make me think, if one tweaked those lyrics a little bit, they could very well apply to Jesus. Okay? Jesus saying that there's nothing that I wouldn't do for you. And that includes dying on a Roman cross. Sometimes God's love changes us, and sometimes we change because we know that we are loved. Let me say that again. Sometimes God's love changes us, and sometimes we change because we are loved. Whatever the case may be for you, it is my Spirit's prayer that you will come to know the power of God's love in your life. And today I thank Him for His matchless love for me, and in brackets, also for you. The last thing I want to say, now it's 9 o'clock and I have another 5. Eh? Is that okay? You want to quickly stand and stretch your legs, or are you okay still? What is that, Uncle Dave? You look like you want to say something. Or you wanting to say, Bevan, please end now. Okay. 5 more minutes. The last thing that I have to thank God for today as we reflect on Thanksgiving and celebration, as we reflect on God's faithful hand in our lives day by day, we have to thank God that He is still busy with us. That His work in our lives is not yet done. Is that a sigh of relief you're giving? We are all work in progress. In his letter from prison, Paul writes to the people of Philippi. And Paul says, you always have to keep in mind, chapter 1, verse 6, you always have to keep in mind that the good work that He has started in you, He will bring to fruition at the right time. And I don't know about you, but that gives me enormous comfort. It gives me enormous hope, for I know that I am work in progress. There's still some pruning happening. There's still some panel beating taking place. And because I am so stubborn and selfish, it's taking Him longer than it should. But He's busy with me, all right. He's busy with me. And you need to thank Him for what He's busy doing in your life as well. In another place, He talks about how we are always and forever being changed from glory into glory. And so what you are looking at here in front is not the finished product. Just as well. I can almost physically feel how active the Holy Spirit is inside of me. How busy He is shaping me, molding me, folding me, making me the person that I need to be. I'm grateful for His patience. I'm grateful for His grace. I'm grateful for His commitment to not give up before the final product emerges. And so today, there's a lot to be thankful for. His undoubted and non-negotiable presence in our lives. His uncompromised love. And the fact that He is still working in us, with us, and through us until the day of Jesus Christ. In the old Methodist hymn book, there's a short hymn by Joseph Hart. It's called This is the God Whom We Adore. I normally use it as a closing hymn because by then people would be so tired they could only cope with a hymn that had 2 verses. Very little has changed over the last 24 years. And Joseph Hart wrote this hymn of faith. This is the God we adore. And the second verse, the last verse in other words, finishes with these 2 lines. We'll thank Him for all that's past, and we'll trust Him for all that's to come. As we praise Him for His goodness today, as we worship Him for His faithfulness, I trust that we as individuals and that all of us as a collective have reached this point where we want to thank Him from the bottom of our hearts for all that is past, and where we trust Him emphatically for all